Sophia Reynolds stood at the edge of Boston's Harbor Walk, the pre-dawn chill curling around her like a reminder of all the years she'd spent chasing approval. At 32, she'd risen to become the youngest senior portfolio strategist at one of Wall Street's most prestigious firms, a milestone that should have filled her with pride. Instead, her grip tightened on the leather strap of her tote, as if holding on to every ounce of confidence she'd mustered on her own. All her life, her father, David Reynolds, had measured her worth by standards she could never quite reach. He was the real estate magnate whose empire stretched from the North Shore to Cape Cod, and when he spoke, construction crews paused their work, and Board of Trade meetings faltered. Yet he never once applauded Sophia's relentless hours poring over market trends, or the late nights she spent refining risk models that outperformed benchmarks by double-digit percentages. Her mother, Margaret, had been warm and nurturing before she married David, but under his steely gaze, she'd learned to shrink into silence so much so that Sophia often found herself comforting her own mother after one of her father's pointed critiques. Her older brother, Michael, carried the Reynolds legacy effortlessly: football scholarships, leadership awards, and a seamless entry into the family business. And her younger sister, Emily, had an innate charm that always coaxed her father into a rare smile. Today, Sophia couldn't remember a single reunion where she'd felt at home. Instead, she arrived at her father's estate, her tailored navy sheath dress and polished heels a silent testament to years spent molding herself into exactly what she thought he wanted. Inside her purse, beneath hotel keycards and a fountain pen invitation to afternoon tea, lay a sealed envelope, one that promised to shatter every expectation he'd ever imposed. By sunset, nothing would ever be the same. Sophia Reynolds stood in the gleaming showroom of Beacon Hill Motors, her pulse quickening as she slid the key fob across the mahogany counter. The dealership's polished chrome and leather interior displays seemed designed to impress, and they did. After 8 years of working grueling 16-hour days as a portfolio strategist, Sophia had finally earned the promotion and the six-figure bonus that came with it. She'd convinced herself that gifting her father the car he once admired at a country club friend's estate would at last bridge the gap between them. She'd chosen the 2025 Mercedes-Benz S-Class in obsidian black metallic, complete with premium leather seats, adaptive air suspension, and a Burmester-registered trademark high-end 3D surround sound system. At a sticker price of $110,000, nearly her entire annual salary before taxes, it was the pinnacle of automotive luxury. She remembered how, at last summer's reunion, her father, David Reynolds, had casually mentioned how impressed he'd been by a friend's Mercedes sedan. His eyes had lit up as he ran his hand along the console, asking detailed questions about horsepower and handling. In that moment, Sophia saw a glimpse of pride in his expression, and it had become her singular motivation. For weeks, she'd agonized over every detail. Would he appreciate the high-resolution digital cockpit should she opt for the piano lacquer trim, or the classic burl walnut more importantly? Would he finally acknowledge her achievements, the late-night financial models, the risk assessments that outperformed the S&P by 20 basis points, the Winklevoss account she'd secured purely on merit? She reasoned that a gift this grand would speak where words had failed. On the Friday before Father's Day, Sophia drove her own modest sedan to her parents' waterfront estate on Cape Cod. She parked behind the sprawling hydrangea bushes to ensure the new car would remain a surprise until everything was ready. Inside her tote, she carried a small wooden box containing the remote key fob, wrapped in green crepe paper and tied with the navy satin ribbon colors her father always said conveyed quiet confidence. Margaret, her mother, was away at her garden club meeting, oblivious to the tempest of emotions Sophia carried. David answered the door in his usual crisp polo shirt and khaki pants, glancing at his watch before greeting her with a curt nod. "Sophia, you're early," he said, eyebrows raising in mild surprise. "I wanted to give you your Father's Day gift privately," she managed, voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach, handing him the box. She watched as he lifted the lid, his practiced reserve dissolving into genuine curiosity. "Is this a joke?" he asked, revealing the sleek silver emblem of the three-pointed star. "S-Class," she said softly, leading him toward the driveway. "Test drive whenever you like." David's initial reaction was shock. His gaze flicked between the box and the dark sedan parked in full view of the water. He walked around it slowly, inspecting every contour, every chrome accent, as though appraising a potential real estate investment. "This is excessive," he finally said, his tone measured. "What are you trying to prove?" Sophia's chest tightened. She forced a smile. "I got promoted," she replied, and I wanted to do something special. He circled the car twice more, tapping the hood and peering under the wheels. You know how much something like this depreciates the moment you drive it off the lot, and the insurance premiums. His words were precise, pragmatic, as if gratitude were a line item on a balance sheet. Inside, Sophia felt the familiar sting of disappointment, but she held her ground. I understand the cost, she answered. That's why I insisted on covering every dollar. David paused, key in hand. He looked at her, eyes narrowing for just a moment, and then slid into the driver's seat. The engine's gentle hum echoed like an admission. He offered her a curt, "Thank you." But it lacked warmth, an obligatory nod rather than the pride she'd hoped for. As he took the car for a brief spin down the private road, Sophia lingered by the hydrangeas, absorbing the distant roar of the V8 engine. She reminded herself that this wasn't the end goal, but the beginning of a statement that her success was real, self-earned, and worthy of recognition, whether he chose to acknowledge it or not. She had done everything in her power to claim her place both in the driver's seat and in his world. Sophia Reynolds sat quietly in the formal living room of her childhood home, the polished mahogany side table reflecting the afternoon sun like a silent witness to the moment she was about to shatter years of careful illusion. In her lap rested the sealed manila envelope containing the definitive proof, a paternity report so precise it left no room for doubt. Across from her, her father, David Reynolds, offered her the polite but distant nod he reserved for board meetings rather than family conversations. At 65, his salt and pepper hair was still immaculately groomed, his tailored blazer perfectly fitting over a crisp button-down shirt. And yet he exuded none of the warmth she'd spent her life chasing. She raised her chin and drew in a steadying breath, carefully recalling every moment of preparation that had led to this confrontation. Only 3 months earlier, a recreational ancestry test had flagged a discrepancy in her genetic markers, an anomaly that had haunted her nights and driven her to surreptitiously collect a sample from one of his hairbrushes. When the full DNA analysis arrived, it confirmed what she had inexplicably sensed all along. David Reynolds was not her biological father. In her purse, the envelope pinged against her smartphone, a steady, insistent presence, the physical weight of truth she had carried here today. Her mother, Margaret, sat at the edge of an adjacent armchair, her hands twisting the pearl necklace that once symbolized the family's unassailable status in their Boston suburb. At 62, Margaret's once vibrant smile had faded under the weight of decades spent deferring to a husband who valued profitability over people. Now, her gaze was fixed on Sophia with a mixture of guilt and desperation, as though Sophia's courage to confront the truth forced her own buried regrets to surface. Sophia's older brother, Michael, lounged in the background, folding and unfolding the business section of the newspaper without meeting her eyes. He had always been the golden child star athlete, top of his class, flawless entry into the Reynolds real estate empire, and his silence now felt like a judgment more cutting than any words. Her younger sister, Emily, hovered nervously by the doorway, her soft features pale with anxiety. Emily had an uncanny ability to diffuse conflict at family gatherings, but even her natural grace seemed powerless to stem the tide of tension in the room. Sophia began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingertips. She placed the envelope on the coffee table between them, its edges aligned precisely with the grain of the wood. I know you've always seen me as the outsider, she said, her tone unwavering as she met David's gaze for the first time in years, and until now, I believed it was because I worked in finance rather than real estate, because I chose Cornell over your alma mater, because I wasn't exactly the daughter you imagined. She paused, letting her words settle. David cleared his throat, as if preparing a corporate rebuttal. Sophia, this is absurd. I've provided every advantage a father could. She cut him off gently, raising her hand. You provided me an education, a name, a life of privilege, but no amount of money or social capital can replace the fatherly love that was never here. The truth is, Dad, that I'm not your daughter. The room fell silent, the only sound the quiet ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Margaret gasped, clutching her pearls. Michael finally looked up, shock and perhaps something like pain flashing across his features. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. David's expression hardened, his posture stiffening as if he were preparing to weather a hostile boardroom takeover. What proof do you have for this accusation? He demanded, voice low but edged with anger. Sophia reached forward and peeled back the envelope's flap, extracting a clean white sheet stamped with the crest of an accredited genetics lab in Cambridge. She slid it across the table, The figure's 99.9999% exclusion spoke more loudly than any explanation. David's eyes flicked to the page, widened, then darted to hers. "This is nonsense," he said after a long moment, though his voice lacked conviction. "I've raised you as my own for 32 years. She allowed herself a sad, understanding smile. "That's the tragedy of it. Dad. I cherished every memory, every lesson I learned under your roof. But the love I craved was always conditional, dependent on what I could achieve, how perfectly I could fit into your world. Today, I'm choosing a different path. I'm no longer defined by your standards or by a name I never truly inherited." Margaret rose, tears brimming in her eyes. "Please, Sophia," she whispered, "let me explain." Sophia shook her head gently. "Some truths don't need explanation." She stood, smoothing her tailored navy sheath dress, a final gesture of poise she'd mastered in her New York boardrooms. She retrieved her purse, nodding once to Emily, who offered a small, tearful smile of support. Emily's presence, Sophia realized, embodied a different kind of family, one built on empathy rather than obligation. As she moved toward the door, she turned back to face David. "I hope you someday understand that fatherhood is more than DNA or social standing. It's about unconditional love." With that, she stepped out into the late afternoon light, leaving behind a mansion echoing with stunned silence and a legacy that no longer held power over her. Outside, Sophia inhaled deeply, tasting freedom on the breeze off the harbor. The sealed envelope was gone, left behind as an offering of truth. Ahead of her lay a new road, one she would navigate on her own terms, free from expectations she never asked for, and unbound by the title of daughter that had always felt more like a performance than a relationship. In the days that followed Sophia Reynolds' dramatic departure from her family's Cape Cod estate, the Reynolds household spun into chaos. Within hours, she'd received a barrage of phone calls and text messages, some pleading, some angry, some incredulous. Her father, David Reynolds, had retained an attorney who delivered a formal demand for the return of his Mercedes S-Class and threatened legal action for public defamation regarding the paternity disclosure. Richard's demand letter, delivered to her New York City law firm's mailroom, was icy in tone, citing reputational harm and insisting she retract her statements immediately. Meanwhile, Michael Reynolds, her elder brother and heir apparent to the Reynolds real estate legacy, maintained a stony silence. He hadn't called or texted once. His allegiance to their father was an open secret. Michael rarely deviated from the family line, and his absence spoke volumes about how tightly the Reynolds dynasty held its ranks together. By contrast, Margaret Reynolds, her mother, was beside herself with guilt and fear. The day after Sophia's exit, Margaret had sent 6 voicemails, each more urgent than the last. "Please come home. Darling," she pleaded. "Let's talk as a family." In one trembling message, she admitted that the envelope Sophia left on the coffee table was the one secret I carried for too long, and begged Sophia to give her a chance to explain the choices she'd made decades earlier. Sophia read those messages from her small Manhattan hotel room, replaying each one before finally drafting a brief response. "I'm safe. I'll call you when I'm ready." It was the only thing she could bring herself to say. Her sister Emily, however, reached out with compassion rather than recrimination. Emily's texts shifted quickly from panic. "What did you do? Where are you?" to genuine concern. "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. And later, let me know if you need anything at all." Their exchange reminded Sophia that family wasn't solely defined by shared blood. It was also built on mutual respect and love. While the Reynolds estate reeled, Sophia reconnected with her father's rival-turned-friend, Henry Peterson, whose business and finance conference in Princeton was only a week away. Over the phone, Henry offered a seat on a panel he was moderating, framing it as an opportunity for her to reclaim her narrative on her own terms. "You don't need their permission to define yourself." "Sophia," he said. His words felt like an anchor in the storm. On the legal front, Sophia instructed her own counsel to negotiate the return of the vehicle. She agreed it would be sold at auction, with proceeds placed into a trust for her future endeavors, rather than revert to her father. Her attorney reminded her that defamation claims would be difficult to sustain once the DNA results were publicly validated, but the threat of litigation still loomed as a reminder of how fiercely the Reynolds name defended its image. In the midst of this upheaval, Sophia carved out time for weekly therapy sessions. In those safe spaces, she unpacked decades of seeking conditional love, her childhood award trophies, the sleepless nights spent modeling market data, even the tailor-made navy sheath dresses she'd selected for family gatherings. Her therapist helped her reframe those accomplishments as evidence of her own strength rather than mere tools in a game of paternal approval. By the end of the week, A tentative truce emerged. Margaret flew to New York on a red-eye flight, determined to meet Sophia face to face. Over coffee at a quiet Greenwich Village cafe, Margaret recounted her own history, how she'd fallen for Thomas Kellner, the MIT engineer who was Sophia's biological father, only to be swayed by the promise of security and prestige the Reynolds name offered. She admitted she'd kept the truth buried out of fear that Sophia's life would unravel, fear that David would retaliate, and fear that she'd lose her daughter forever. Sophia listened, her heart heavy with empathy and the bittersweet realization that the woman before her had been trapped in nearly the same web of expectations. When Margaret reached across the table to clasp her hand, Sophia felt the first genuine spark of healing. Back in Boston, whispers echoed through the tight-knit Cape Cod community the Reynolds empire was fraying, its carefully curated image cracked by scientific fact and unvarnished truth. Some neighbors offered sympathetic smiles, others shifted uncomfortably, unsure what to say. But for Sophia, the cacophony of gossip was a small price to pay for the freedom she'd claimed, freedom from the unrelenting standards of a father who saw her as anything less than his golden heir. In those turbulent days, Sophia Reynolds discovered that the true aftermath of revelation wasn't only about the upheaval it caused, but also about the unexpected connections it forged, connections rooted in authenticity, resilience, and the unwavering conviction that one's worth is never up for debate. As the final course's silver platters were cleared and the chandelier's glow softened over the long mahogany table, Sophia Reynolds rose from her seat with a calm resolve that silenced the gentle clatter of porcelain. Across from her, her father, David Reynolds, had just finished praising her brother's latest development project, while her mother, Margaret, hovered anxiously at his side, as though buoyed by every approving nod he bestowed. Sophia's tailored navy sheath dress and pearl bracelet, tokens of etiquette she'd adopted over countless reunions, suddenly felt inadequate armor for the truth she was about to lay bare. She let her gaze drift around the table one last time to Michael, his posture perfect, but his eyes distant, to Emily, cheeks flushed and hands clasped tightly in her lap, to the Petersons and other family friends, their expressions polite curiosity. Then, in one deliberate motion, Sophia placed the unassuming manila envelope, its edges crisp, its contents irreversible, directly before her father's place card. The hush that followed was profound, the kind of silence that falls when an orchestra stops mid-symphony. "Dad," Sophia began, her voice steady but warm enough to carry across the expanse of the table. "For 32 years I've measured my worth by your standards." She paused, letting her words sink in as the ornate silverware reflected her determined expression. "I thought if I earned the right grades, the right internships, the right title, you would finally see me as your daughter." David's brow furrowed. "Sophia, what are you talking about?" he said, though his tone lacked its usual crisp authority, replaced by something more brittle. She drew in a breath that tasted of salt air, echoes of the harbor walk mornings she'd used for quiet reflection before heading to her Manhattan office. "I've kept this secret, too," she said, lifting the envelope's flap and revealing a laboratory-issued certificate from a Cambridge genetics center. "But I can't keep pretending that I belong to a world that's never truly been mine." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he flicked through the pages, the percentages, the genetic markers, the unambiguous conclusion. A tremor passed through the room. Emily's gasp was the only sound until David's hand slammed lightly on the table. "This is preposterous," he barked, though the argument in his posture betrayed his uncertainty. Sophia met his glare with a gentle firmness. "The numbers don't lie. You provided my upbringing, my last name, even opportunities I wouldn't have had otherwise. But blood is more than a name on a balance sheet." She looked to her mother, whose lips trembled and eyes welled with tears, then to Michael, whose perfect composure failed as shock washed over his face. "I'm not accusing you of wrongdoing," she added, voice softening. "I'm simply claiming the truth." A heavy silence settled again, broken only by the distant hum of the kitchen staff preparing coffee. Margaret stood, her voice quavering. "Sophia, please." But Sophia shook her head, dignity radiating from her posture. "Some truths don't need debate." She stood fully, the finality of the moment settling like snow over Cape Cod in winter. "I came here tonight hoping for acceptance, but I leave with clarity." With that, she stepped back from the table. Chairs scraped softly as nearby guests edged away, unsure whether to intervene or observe. Sophia paused at the threshold of the dining room, turning once more to the assembled family. Her tone was compassionate, yet resolute. "Family isn't defined by DNA or social standing. It's built on unconditional love and respect. I wish you well." Then she quietly closed the French doors behind her, leaving the envelope and a roomful of stunned faces in her wake. Outside, the lantern-lit pathway seemed to welcome her more warmly than any greeting she'd ever received inside. Sophia inhaled the night air, tasting freedom for the first time in her life. The echo of her heels on the stone path sounded like a new beginning each step, carrying her away from the expectations that had bound her, toward a future she would shape on her own terms. In the days following Sophia Reynolds's explosion of truth at the family reunion, the walls of her parents' Cape Cod estate echoed with turmoil. By the time she landed back in her small Manhattan apartment, her phone was already buzzing 17 missed calls, 29 texts. Some were frantic pleas from her mother, Margaret, each voicemail more desperate than the last. "Sweetheart, please come home, we need to talk. I never meant to hurt you, you deserve an explanation. Your father is beside himself, I'm so sorry." Margaret's messages shattered Sophia's resolve. For a moment, she had always known her mother loved her, even if love had been masked by fear and silence. But she needed space to breathe and to decide whether forgiveness or distance would best serve her own healing. Her brother Michael, ever the family's dutiful heir, never called. His silence spoke volumes. Loyalty to their father's empire outweighed any bond with his own sister. Sophia found that painful, but not surprising. She had always suspected Michael saw her as the odd one out, too independent, too outspoken, just as David had always treated her. By contrast, her sister Emily sent a constant stream of supportive texts. "I'm so proud of you, Soph. You were brave. Let me know if you need me to bring you groceries or just sit with you. Family isn't only about blood, it's about who stands by you." Those messages were lifelines. Emily's empathy reminded Sophia that unconditional love could exist even outside the rigid hierarchy David had imposed. Within 48 hours, Sophia retained an attorney of her own. The day her father's demand letter arrived coldly, requesting the immediate return of his $110,000 Mercedes S-Class, plus threatening a lawsuit for defamation of character, she read it without flinching. Her counsel advised that once the paternity report was in the public domain, any defamation claim would collapse. But the threat itself underscored how ferociously the Reynolds name guarded its reputation. Meanwhile, word of the DNA revelation spread through their coastal community faster than high tide. Neighbors murmured behind clipped hedges, local newspapers sniffed for angles, and the yacht club quietly prepared for the inevitable social fallout. To most, the Reynolds dynasty had always been untouchable, a real estate empire built on concrete, granite, and decades of carefully cultivated prestige. Now, that fortress had a glaring crack. Amid the external storm, Sophia found refuge in weekly therapy sessions, in a sunlit office near Union Square. She began untangling the knots of shame and self-doubt accumulated over a lifetime of seeking paternal approval. Her therapist helped her recognize the hollow victory in David's acknowledgement that the car was yours to sell, but not yours to keep. Those late afternoons, hundreds of words, tears shed, and sudden laughter became the unglamorous crucible in which Sophia forged a more compassionate relationship with herself. On the 5th day after the reunion, Margaret arrived in New York on the 6:18 a.m. Northeast Regional. She looked tired but determined, carrying an orchid in a ceramic pot, Sophia's favorite flower. They met at a quiet cafe in Greenwich Village, where the tables spilled onto the sidewalk and the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the city's hum. Margaret's hands trembled as she explained the truth she'd hidden for 32 years, how she'd fallen in love with Thomas Keller, an MIT engineer, only to be coerced by family expectations into marrying David, how she'd carried pregnancy secrets alone, afraid that revealing them would shatter her daughter's world, how every time she'd tried to speak up, the moment had felt wrong until it was too late. Sophia listened, her heart aching and swelling at once. She realized her mother had been trapped by the same pressures that had ensnared her social standing, fear of scandal, the illusion of a perfect family. As Margaret's tears fell onto the cafe table, Sophia reached across and took her hand. "I forgive you," she said, and the words tasted like both an ending and a beginning. Back on Cape Cod, the legal battle over the Mercedes had already been quietly settled. Sophia agreed to sell the car at auction, directing the proceeds into a trust for her future ventures. Michael never spoke of it. Emily sent a single text, "Well done." And David? He remained at the helm of his business, issuing terse press statements about family privacy. But his public stoicism could not hide the fissure that now ran through the Reynolds veneer. Whether he ever fully grasped the depth of his daughter's courage was unclear, but Sophia knew she would never again base her worth on his approval. In that turbulent week, she discovered the true meaning of family: those who see you, support you, and love you unconditionally. as she stepped out onto the west side sidewalk, sunlight reflecting off the Hudson. Sophia breathed deeply. The road ahead was uncharted, but for the first time, she would travel it on her own terms, and that certainty felt immeasurable. Sophia Reynolds stood on the balcony of her Boston hotel, the city lights shimmering like hope on the water. It had been 6 months since she placed the DNA report before her father, and in that time she'd reclaimed her life. Weekly therapy helped her realize that true worth comes from within, not from anyone else's approval. Her bond with her mother, Margaret, deepened into honest morning coffees instead of silence. Her sister Emily became a chosen ally, offering unwavering support. Sophia met her biological father, Thomas Keller, amid Central Park's autumn leaves. His genuine curiosity healed wounds she'd hidden for decades. Professionally, Sophia's reputation soared on its own merits, no longer the Reynolds heiress, but Sophia Reynolds, senior portfolio strategist celebrated for integrity and expertise. She sold the Mercedes, invested the proceeds in her own business ventures, and watched as the Reynolds empire's polished image fractured without her. For the first time, she felt the lightness of liberation, free from conditional love, guided by self-respect and authentic connections. Life teaches us that the strongest families aren't always those of blood, but those who uplift us unconditionally. If Sophia's journey inspires you to claim your own worth or walk away from expectations that no longer serve you, please share your story in the comments below. And if you believe your value is defined by your heart and choices, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of resilience and renewal.